Michaela, you want to, um, let's see, I have Michaela's, I can text Michaela right here. Would you like me to text Michaela the phone number she would call? Oh, she might be going for her phone.
Yep.
Or different computer.
Great. Well, while we're waiting for Michaela, I'm going to do a quick welcome and land acknowledgement for all of us that are here. So virtual spaces cannot replace the lands that sustain and empower us. I'm here at home in Worcester, Massachusetts, the homelands of the Nipmuc Nation people and their allied tribes, past and present. Nipmuc Nation Tribal Council is located at 25 Main Street in Grafton, and the Hassanamisco Indian Museum is at 80 Brigham Hill Road in Grafton. NEMA recognizes that our organization and those of our members were founded within a colonizing society, which continues the exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples through New England and beyond. You can use the Indigenous Peoples land map to find where you're zooming in from, or if you're working on certain collections and want to know what lands those are coming from, you can use that native land map there. So thank you all so much for joining us this morning. I know we're still working on some technical difficulties, but I'm going to hand it over to the wonderful PAG chairs, Camille and Barrett.
Okay, very good. I still have my phone here so that if you want me to give, text Michaela a phone number or something, but of course she can hear you, so I'll do that. Welcome everybody. I'm Camille Breeze, and together with Barrett Keating, we are the co-chairs of the NEMA Conservators PAG. And we're very excited about this series. We had a nice group of people at conference for sort of the debut of this concept. And so now we're going to try to do this quarterly. Barrett is a furniture and wooden artifacts conservator working out of Cape Cod, and he is in private practice. Michaela is an objects conservator, which is just as all encompassing as it sounds. And Michaela is working at Historic New England, and I'm a textile conservator, and my company, Museum Textile Services, is in Andover, Massachusetts. So between us, you've got 100 years of experience practically in conservation. And our goal is just to make sure that people are asking the right questions, know where to go for resources, and maybe we can even give you some practical advice for handling things yourself, which after all is part of what our goal is to teach you what everybody is capable of learning how to do, and then what to ask people for help for. So I have a list of questions here. Why don't we jump in with a question? A couple people asked us about mold. So Barrett, do you want to talk about mold?
Oh, no, I don't. I hate mold.
I know.
Everybody hates mold. But yes, I guess it's ubiquitous in this day and age with the global warming and the rise in temperature and relative humidity. That's what mold needs. It's a fungus or fungi that it needs food and a certain temperature and a certain humidity for the spores to grow and spread, which they do very easily. So as conservators, whether it's Camille working on textiles or Michaela working on objects and their vast collection at Historic New England, or the furniture that I work on, it's always the same thing. It's trying to isolate the spores before they can spread, identifying the areas that have the mold, and then treating the mold. And after we treat it, we then want to prevent it from spreading onto other objects in the collection or the owner's home. So that's a list of steps that I'm sure we'll answer here as people come in with different questions, whether they be textiles or furniture. We can get into the specifics of how to deal with it.
Right, so that question was from Melissa. Hi, Melissa. As a textile conservator, I don't have the same resources available as people working on inorganic objects or other solid objects. So we will use our first line of defense that all of us should know how to do, which is we clean off the mold, the macroscopic part of the mold. So, a careful cleaning cloth can do that. But with a more involved object like, say, a sofa or a garment, we generally employ a low suction vacuum. You don't need a Nilfisk or a Tiger Vac. You can just have a nice say a Miele canister vacuum. And we want the one that has a variable suction dial, so you can dial it low or high. And then like an $8 set of micro vacuum tools that you can get off of Amazon. They're meant, or originally they were for like cleaning your keyboard. So with these tools, a vacuum set on low and a reasonable attachment that doesn't set off big alarms in your head, doesn't suck the textile or the artifact up into it, you can go about systematically removing that deposit on the surface of something that will consist of both the microbial activity and then whatever their food source is. And that will be a big step in reducing the danger that those objects have to your collection. And at that point, you might want to talk to a conservator about whether washing is helpful or fumigation. There currently anoxic treatments like what is available at Historic New England, those are not, they do not accept moldy objects. That's for de-infesting for insects through anoxia. And in fact, they make sure that you don't bring moldy things into the bubble. So we have a handout on the MTS page under resources. So the Museum Textile Services webpage is museumtextiles.com. And then there's a resources section. And then there's a section called basics, perhaps, or environment or something I should know. And in there, you'll see fumigating with chlorine dioxide. Chlorine dioxide is a dangerous chemical, but we employ it in a form that's made for bombing your boat, for example. So on that handout, you'll see what we recommend you buy, and you create a little chamber. Sometimes we use the entire bathroom as our chamber, and we'll put 3 or 4 things in there. But if you follow those directions, you'll be able to de-infest a moldy collection, assuming that there are not other condition issues with those objects that inhibit your handling them. So that's another resource for you.
So
And of course, oh, I hear Michaela. There's Michaela.
Yeah, let me unmute her.
Great.
Whoops. I think you have to press a button to unmute.
So Camille.
So, are you hearing me through the
Yes.
phone? I hear myself. And you can see me too?
Yes.
Okay, because now I'm all messed up and I'm hearing myself in echo. And anyway, can I comment on the mold
Yes.
question? So I've had good luck using vinegar on objects that aren't damaged by vinegar. There now. No, I'm still trying to mute myself. So like the underside of a table that often gets moldy, or the inside of drawers, or like unfinished wood that get moldy. There's an approach where you can either use Lysol or vinegar, and I just find the vinegar to be a little bit safer. So you can vacuum with the low suction vacuum that Camille was talking about to remove what you see, but then a little treatment with a cloth that's wet with vinegar and wiping, or something that can be disposed of, like a paper towel wet with vinegar. So you're kind of wiping once to remove any trace of mold particulates, and then you can even apply another round and just leave it. And vinegar, which is a mild acid, sinks in and helps in some ways to be a slight prevention of further mold. It's not killing it. I think what Camille mentioned is probably one of the only ways to actually kill mold, but to remove it and reduce it, I've had good luck with vinegar. It also works fine on painted surfaces. Really, the mold is eating the dirt, and so, or the dust. So if you can cleaning is a very effective method to reduce and remove mold. But I've had good luck with this vinegar treatment.
Yeah, I'd like to to agree with what Michaela says, really removing the dirt after you've done that first step of removing the mold spores so you're not transferring them. The next most important thing is you have to get that organic food substance off the surface. It could be pollen down here on the Cape. Salt crystals from the living next to the ocean anywhere on the coast is a great food for mold spores. Any dirt, oils, anything like that. So if you're removing the mold and you're not taking that next step of the cleaning, you're just setting yourself up for that same repeat process. Vinegar is a possibility. I tend to use a very high quality denatured alcohol on any surface of furniture that doesn't have finish. If it has finish, the alcohol is most probably going to affect the finish that's on the piece. So like Michaela says, vinegar is a much safer alternative. But yeah, the same thing that Camille is doing, it's that same process for removing the mold spores without transferring them and another important thing is you want to make sure you're wearing an organic vapor cartridge while you're doing the mold cleaning and also gloves so that you're not spreading it into your respiratory system because it has very serious health side effects if you breathe mold spores.
I'll add to that too, which might sound contradictory, but mold comes from high humidity, anything over 70%. And so a way to keep the air moving and prevent mold from setting on your collections are fans. We've had really good luck with the Vornado brand fans. They work well and they use little energy, and we've kept them on like 24 hours a day for years, where it's just blowing a gentle air through the room in rooms where there's no airflow to kind of prevent the mold from happening in the first place. So if you really can't control the RH very well, and there's potential problems, that if you have a fan before you have your mold problem, that can be helpful. On the contrary, you don't want to blow around mold spores. Mold spores are everywhere, so you're going to be blowing them around. But if you have an active mold outbreak, you don't want fans. You want to remediate the active outbreak first. But then fans can help prevent a reintroduction just from keeping the air moving.
I was taught an interesting sort of way to measure the threat of microbial activity, which is that if you have 90 degrees and 90% relative humidity, you can have an otherwise passive presence of mold bloom with just 3 days of those conditions. Yeah. So those are those 3 or 4 little heat spells we have over the summer, 5, 6. Mm-hmm. So if you see that coming in your weather forecast, you can plan ahead with air circulation, perhaps a window unit where you can also lower the RH. Then it only takes 3 weeks of persistent 80 degree, 80% relative humidity for the same thing to occur. And that's, sort of simulates a tropical environment where you might have the presence of mold outbreaks all year long. And the reason why I get most of my calls for mold in the end of the summer is because it takes 3 months of persistent 70 degrees, 70% relative humidity for a mold outbreak to occur. And that's really what describes most of our places. We will be chugging along all summer thinking we're doing really well. And then, sort of hurricane season right around there, you might have that cumulative effect and realize that an area that you'd been checking all summer has now got some bloom on it. So that can help you sort of set up a reminder for when your risk is highest and what to do to check.
So air conditioning and dehumidifiers are the best tools in removing the ambient environment to allow mold spores to grow, which, like Camille said, is above 70 degrees or above 70% relative humidity. So if you're keeping it below that, they're not going to be growing.
Okay, there's a really interesting question here from Sherry that I would love to hear what Barrett and Michaela would like to weigh in. How to remove or not old adhesive labels similar to mailing labels used for numbering objects, like those ones with the little red border, which I find all the time. So would either of you like to answer that question?
Yeah, this is perfect for Michaela. She, you know, with her the collection of hundreds of thousands of objects.
Yeah,
That is a very, very difficult thing, and I'm sure she can serve this one up on a platter for you, Sherry.
I can. I'll try to at least. So I guess the first thing is noting what type of material the label is on. And if it's on glass or ceramics or something like that that's not going to be affected by a solvent, then you can go ahead and use acetone. Most likely acetone will work right away to solubilize that adhesive. But you don't want to use acetone on anything finished, any textile, any plastic, anything really other than ceramics, glass, or metal. So those three things, ceramics, glass, metal, go ahead and use acetone. The other, pretty much everything else, I would start with mineral spirits, naphtha or odorless mineral spirits. I mean, some will work better than others, and you just kind of have to test. But if you can kind of introduce it under the label, because what you've got is the adhesive and then the carrier, which is the paper. So, you know, you're not trying to dissolve the paper, you're trying to solubilize the adhesive. So if you can try to help it along with a little blunt, like wooden, if you can sharpen a ice cream popsicle stick and help it along perhaps on an object that could handle that, but oftentimes just using a cotton swab, introducing the mineral spirits on a cotton swab and then pushing it along should work. Some adhesives are more tenacious than others, but you don't want to make a big, huge blanched spot on your object. You might get the label off, but then you've done damage to your finish. So as much as you can mechanically do just by pulling the paper off itself with no solvent, that's probably step number one. But generally mineral spirits is pretty innocuous on a surface, and that's the next best thing.
Interesting.
Any other input?
My question would be, what danger does an adhesive label pose to different types of artifacts? And what does that tell us about what the urgency is to remove that old label, which is part of its history? What do you think about that?
Right. Aside being disfiguring, what danger is it doing? Well, it depends on what it's adhered to. I mean, if it's on a piece of paper, it could permanently disfigure that paper, or what's likely probably already happened is that there's been some oxidation around the paper. So once you remove your label, it will look a different color than what's around it. Also the case with wood. But oftentimes they're just disfiguring, and sometimes they're right on the center of something. So I can understand the desire to get them off. Oftentimes they're practically falling off. So if you really just try to get them off mechanically with a little spatula, or like I said, a wooden tool or your fingernail, you can do well. But if you're going to pull up fibers, that's where you have an issue. Another thing I think where Camille's going is if you're using a solvent to remove that adhesive, you're solubilizing that adhesive, and who's to say the adhesive is going to come away with the paper and not get embedded in the textile or leather or whatever it is that's below. So take caution in doing this. It's an age-old problem. Paper conservators are usually the ones who address this issue of tape or labels because they're usually on paper or they're made of paper. But we've all seen that. Any other comments?
Yeah, I think there might be another angle if I heard Camille right, is is there are times where you want to leave the labels on because
Sure.
they're
Yeah.
part of the history of the piece. And I know I've had some desks from some very prominent industrial people that were famous people at the head of industry over the 20th century, and so their handwriting is on the labels.
Right.
It's very important that they stay there because it's a part of the history of the piece. So that's a great situation because, like Michaela's saying, it's a nightmare when you have to remove them. You get different oxidation and you get the different layers underneath, and we do the same thing on furniture. It's you try to remove as much as you can with scalpels mechanically, but the adhesives that unfortunately they're usually rubberized adhesives that go between paper and the object, they actually turn into what's called a concretion as they age and oxidize. And that's why they're so difficult to remove, because it's not a soft, pliable, rubberized material anymore. It's just like the word says, concretion. It's a hard, impossible to remove object. So we try to get 99% of it with a scalpel down. And from there, that little tiny bit that's remaining, sometimes you can remove without having any deleterious effect to the finish of the furniture. But it's one of the tougher things in the business. And again, paper conservators deal with that on a daily basis. And I would not want to do that all day long.
No.
It's tough.
I mean, sometimes the label is adhered. Sometimes I've actually taken great efforts to re-adhere labels that have important information, like Barrett is mentioning. And on those kind of paper labels that are often adhered to furniture, oftentimes I'll use wheat starch paste to re-adhere, but they're more like stamps where something is kind of wet and then been stuck on. So sometimes water can be used to remove them. Mm. So that's one of the things we conservators try to do is figure out what it is first. What is the carrier and what is the adhesive, and then what can you use to remove it if necessary.
I hope that's helpful. Sherry, you know Michaela, so I believe you know Michaela from maybe not. Anyway, you know us, me, and you know Nima. So if you would like to speak more to any of us, you can find our contact information.
Yeah, thank you.
Michaela, you said the magic word, leather. Angela McBrien is right here, and she had a great question about a pair of 70s leather bell bottoms, which makes me think of Al Green's amazing pants at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You got to see them. And she was wondering how to store them. So my immediate answer would just be, folded in a storage box with no weight on them. If there were more condition issues, some sausages are interleaving with acid-free tissue. But it occurs to me that I've never actually stored anything leather. I've never done that. My leather objects have been objects. So what's your instinct telling you, Michaela?
Well, I guess I wouldn't fold them just because of the creases that could happen in the leather. So if you could leave them full length and stuffed with acid-free tissue like Camille mentioned, or if they had to be folded, kind of a gentle fold with tissue in the fold, like Camille mentioned, so that there's not a hard crease. I have worked on leather objects that have hard creases, and that's like the hardest thing to repair, really, on a leather object. If there's an area, if there are any metal fasteners, like the button or the zipper or anything like that, oftentimes with long-term storage of leather and metals, you get this green waxy material, organometallic corrosion. It's a reaction between the natural waxes and oils in the leather, but also leather treatments that have been put on leather objects, especially objects that are meant to be worn or used, like pants or horse tack or saddles or things like that. They've all had like leather dressings put on them over the years to keep them soft and usable, and those things react poorly with the metals. So you might want to kind of wipe the metals off with mineral spirits first before storing them, and then check these areas every once in a while. If there's anything you could do to kind of isolate the button, maybe wrap the button with tissue itself, because if it does eventually become green with this corrosion, and it's resting on another part of the leather, or you folded it over and the button is touching the leg somewhere, then that spot could turn green, and that would be very difficult to remove. So anything metal, any rivets or zippers or anything, just try to clean first, but isolate and protect with tissue beforehand, before storing.
It looks like Angela wrote in the chat that the leather will not fold. Think about it as shoe leather, and then any tips for storing them hanging.
I'm not a proponent of hanging storage unless your space requires it. So I can see the attraction though, because then it's under its own weight, but it's not flat. And so if that looks like something you want to explore, then you can take a clamping pant hanger, and I tend to staple or double stick tape some batting, polyester batting to either side of that. And that not only makes it for a tighter clamp, but it's a padded clamp. And you could examine the potential of clamping either the bottom of each leg or the waistband. If this is like you said 70s, it's making me think of more industrial things like welding outfits and stuff I've seen, where everything's cross-linked, everything's stiff, and has really no drape potential at all. You're just storing a 3D stiffened object. And by keeping it in more optimal environmental conditions, you're going to stave off the transformation of these 70s pants into something like that. But obviously make sure that pressure on the area that you're contemplating hanging it from is okay. If you feel like they're suitable to a padded hanger approach you just want to make the diameter of a crossbar of a pair of hangers something wide that is amenable to the turning of the pants. I love Hanger Bee hangers, but I can't remember if she has one where the crossbar is padded, but you can make that by reading a couple padded hanger recipes off the internet and seeing what you think sounds best and most suitable. And then to me, it sounds like you might want to think of a secondary method with twill tape or something clever like that that would prevent them from sliding off in between visits to wherever they're stored. So each of these decisions has then a secondary follow-up that you have to think about. But I would love to see them in a 60-inch long textile box. And yes, you can put a few other things in it, of course, but, depending on weight and stuff. That's probably your best bet.
Sounds like Angela might have them near her to show us. Is that true, Angela? You said you have them? We got to show and tell of what they are. And while we're waiting, it looks like there's a few more questions, one around petticoats, one around foxing for textiles. Oh, look, there they are.
Beautiful. So have you passed the bar through the belt loops? Super clever. Super clever. If you unmute yourself, we can hear what you're saying. Okay.
I'm worried about it straining the belt loops.
Sure. Yeah. Why don't we talk some other time, because I have so many ideas that I need to self-eliminate some of those by asking you more questions, but it's not something you have to worry about immediately. You can put it on your less urgent list, and we'll talk over the next few weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's super clever though. I like your solution.
Angela, thanks for showing us those. That made my day, seeing leather bell bottoms.
Yeah.
They belong to one of our board presidents.
Oh.
Beautiful.
So must ask them to donate money to get the storage solution up to date. or not.
Blessedly probably would, yes.
Good.
Thank you.
Sure. So there are two questions about cleaning. One of them from Melissa is, deciding when to clean and when not to clean, which is a very big question. And then there's another question about specifically cleaning white cottons and neutral things like that. I'll answer quickly and then we'll see what Michaela and Barrett want to say. When a customer, a client, a colleague contacts me about specifically like a collection of white cotton things, I will often advise them on how to do some of the basic wet cleaning themselves. So first I would talk about how much particulate, dust, dirt, insect remains there may be on those objects that would make you want to vacuum them first. If they are otherwise look fine, then water does the vast majority of the cleaning in a wet cleaning situation, not the additives. So if the piece is stable, if you have a stack of towels, maybe a couple clean sheets on hand, and you have water that's reliable. Some towns and cities put more chlorine, put more, there may be acidic water, etc. Near the ocean, again, your public water could be a little meh. But if your water is otherwise pretty neutral, then clean your bathtub and you can do some washing in there. Just not too much wringing or patting or anything, literally just lying, rinse and drain, fill and drain, fill and drain. Careful at the drain, of course. And then once you've let the majority of the water out, you can gather that object in towels. You might want to swap out your towels as you're sort of cradling it and trying to get some of the water out. When it's light enough to lift without any damage, move it to a space you've prepared, like a big sheet of plastic on the floor or on your pool table or something like that. And then you'll carefully be able to open the object out to allow it to dry flat. There are some times that we can dry things hanging, but that is a bit problematic too. The safest thing is to dry them flat. See what water you can get out, and then get some air circulation going in the room, a fan somewhere nearby. You're not trying to blow the object, you're just trying to keep the air moving so all the warm, moist air from the object doesn't sit over it. And you'd be surprised, you can get most of the water out and your objects will be dry, certainly by the next day. Yeah, also cat proof it, that's my problem. And that's going to solve the majority of your problems of so storage lines where things have been stored in cabinets, things like that. The goal of a simple treatment like that is to reduce the pollutants, to improve the preservation level of the object, to then allow you to either store it safely or move on in your goals, like think about exhibiting something. Naturally, if you see a red flag, obey your instinct. Don't necessarily do that simple treatment to something that has an inscription you're concerned about, although they're usually water safe. Whenever you have a dye, if you have more than 2 colors, it might actually be 4 colors and you can't tell that there's so many shades of red and one red bleeds and the others don't, and you test the ones that don't bleed. These are the pitfalls that would lead you to do something you might regret later. So anything more complicated than that, and you'd want to talk to a conservator. And sometimes we just need to give you specific advice one-on-one on how you might be able to do something. And that's for literally the most basic thing, something that if it were yours, like your favorite summer dress and you've had it 20 years and you don't want to put it through the washer, you're basically doing the same thing. You're just being a little more careful about how older threads will pop when you stretch it too much and things like that. So there you go, and a conservator telling you to do it yourself.
Camille, there was a kind of a follow-up question to that there. What about the stains?
Oh, yes. So the short answer is stains are usually permanent. I know. Not always and not forever. But when, for example, you see a christening gown, again, they're fine cotton fabrics, often stained around here where the baby was being fed or they spit up or something. Also wedding gowns, there's a lot of sweaty palms happening in wedding gowns that doesn't show up until decades later. So by the time you see a stain, it's potentially it's a permanent chemical alteration of the material. That's not the same thing as an accretion or a deposit of something. So if you can feel it with your hand, if you can pick it gently with your fingernail without doing any harm to the textile, then that's not technically what we call a stain, or maybe it's a stain in the making. But those accretions can generally come off. Even a wet cotton swab over a deposit, you might be able to pull it up, pull the majority of that deposit or accretion off. But otherwise, the number of objects we get in that we wash is relatively low. Of those, the number that we use a stronger agent like a bleaching agent, color safe bleaching agent, for example, also relatively low. And then of those, the percentage that look better after cleaning is very high. But generally, the one stain that you like the least is the one stain that's going to stay. So that's the brutal truth of stains on textiles. But a conservator can help you determine whether there is hope to improving it. Terrible news. Somebody say something more positive.
I gotta go wash my clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, put them away clean is the best thing to do. Moths like dirty clothes also.
Good point.
Yeah. But I guess, do you think that question was in reference to cleaning textiles, or was it more a general cleaning question? I mean, I know there was certainly a textile cleaning question.
Well, why don't you answer Melissa's question for an artifact that you work with more often, about the issue of how we go about determining whether cleaning is the best thing for the object.
Oh, right. That was the question. Well, you're removing, certainly you can't unclean. So is there something about that dirt? What is the dirt? Is it museum dirt? Often we talk about that. Like, is it dust that's accumulated from sitting on the shelf in your museum, or is it dirt from the use of the object? And so what is important to you about this object, and how important is it that it needs to be cleaned? So that's one thing you have to think about. Where does the dirt come from? Oftentimes in ethnographic objects, which are like Native American objects, things you someone might use in their life, a basket. If there's anything about that object, like that basket was used for carrying corn 2,000 years ago, well, you don't want to clean it very much because you don't want to remove traces of the corn or whatever else might have been in there that someday could be incredibly valuable. But aside from that, the information, a shirt that was worn by someone in the army or in a war, or a warrior that might have blood stains or sweat stains because of use, you might not want to clean that. But accumulated dust over 30 years or 300 years of it sitting on a shelf, or people using it and handling it and having hand grease on it, maybe that is what you want to clean off. So you always start dry cleaning first. So start with a vacuum to get any loose particulates, a vacuum and a brush, and that's a great way to clean so many things. So if you have a paintbrush, depending on the size of your object, 1 inch or 2 inch or even a 1/2 inch soft brush, you can tape up the metal ferrule of the brush so you don't scratch your object with it. And just, here we go. I'm holding my vacuum in one hand and I'm brushing with my brush from the other hand. So just brush into the vacuum, and that's always step number 1 of cleaning. And then step number 2, we use cosmetic sponges a lot to clean. You can buy them at the CVS, wherever. Get the ones that don't have perfumes or lotions added. Sometimes they have. So just like the neutral white wedge sponge, and you'll be amazed at how much those clean. Of course, if you've got like a flaking paint surface, you don't want to clean with a sponge on that. But those are the next line of defense. And then after that, depending on what the object is, oftentimes just warm water. on a cotton cloth. It does a great job. A little wipe with warm water and then another cotton cloth to dry it off can really do a lot. So those basic, simple methods that everybody has access to are, I would say, the best places to start.
Yeah, excellent point. So Barrett, how do we clean our fine wooden furniture in our exhibit spaces?
You know, Michaela nailed a lot of it there, you know, starting with the very gentle vacuuming with a HEPA filter vacuum, and using the paintbrushes is great, or the soft goat hair brushes, depending how fragile the object is. But it all depends on the finish. If it's a friable, you know, fractured finish, you don't want to do that because you're going to lose pieces of original finish that in the conservation treatment later on, you may be consolidating back down. But if it is a finish that's in good shape, it hasn't fractured or tented or is cleaving off. After that first step of removing the mold and the dust and all of that, to remove that dirt layer that's on there, I find there's two very simple steps that you can do yourself. And the first one is a very, very mild soap. And that's just take 1 drop of dishwater soap like Dawn and put it in a pint of warm water, just tepid water. And that's going to give you an extremely mild, gentle soap. And always test on the back of the piece or down low that it isn't going to take off the finish, because sometimes finishes get so old and oxidized and polarized that even water will take off the finish. So make sure that very gentle soap doesn't take off the finish. And then what we use is cotton balls. Once we determine that it's safe to use that mild soap, and we do circular motions with a cotton ball. And after about 20 seconds of letting that mild soap work chemically on the dirt, you'll see it start to break down. And the great thing about the cotton ball is it's a white palette that you can look at. So after 20 seconds of little circular motions with your mild soap that's barely wet, you can look at the white cotton ball. And dirt is usually always black or gray or a very grayish black brown. If you start seeing any other colors than that coming off, especially colors that are similar to the color of the piece itself, then you know you're taking off more than dirt. You're actually getting into the finish, and you want to stop and remove it with distilled water on a cotton ball as well. But the other thing is, unfortunately today, a lot of people like to use oils, mineral oil, lemon oil. They think that wood needs to be fed, which it doesn't. It's not alive. And so all of these heavy oil layers that go on furniture become dust magnets. They're non-drying oils. They sit there in the room, and they actually attract all of that dust that floats around in the air that we see on our furniture 2 days after we've cleaned the house, and you're like, where is it coming from? So now you've got this thick, oily, non-drying oil on the furniture that smells nice and has a great name on the bottle, and all that dust is going to come down and be attracted to that. And actually, over a period of time, they used to use linseed oil for this purpose, that oil actually hardens up and becomes an opaque substance that's extremely difficult to remove. But as conservators, we do a lot of polymerized linseed oil removal, and it takes very complex gels to do it. But the best thing that you can do to prevent that is, if you do have oils on your piece, or you've put any of these lemon oils or Pledge, which is a silicone oil that's used in industry, or any of those oils, you want to take a odorless paint thinner on a nice day when you can open the windows, and just a soft cotton cloth, and wipe it over all of those oils, and it will pick up those oils that you've put on the piece and bring it back to its natural finish. And when you get there, you can rub a soft beeswax or paste wax on the piece as a protective coating. And that's all you should ever put on furniture, is what's called paste wax. It's a combination of beeswax and carnauba wax. And it sets up a great protective coating, and it gives you a beautiful luster, antique luster. And after that's on there, like Michaela said, all you ever have to do is take a soft flannel cloth and just wipe the dust off, you know, put a couple drops of water on there if you want. And just, that's it. That's all you have to do. The wax won't go anywhere. It doesn't disappear. unless it's a dining room table and you're entertaining on it and you're having salad dressing, you know, acidic things like that, or glasses of wine and things where you may need to wax that table every 6 months. But for all your other pieces, end tables and things, you won't have to wax those for 10 years, maybe 15 years if you're just dusting them with a soft cloth. So the two cleaners, the basic cleaners, are the water-based drop of dishwater soap, 1 drop in a pint of warm water with barely wetted cotton balls. And after you've applied that, you always have to clear it with distilled water, same way with cotton balls. And let that dry 24 hours. And then do the mineral spirits, where you're applying odorless mineral spirits or odorless paint thinner, very small amounts on a rag, and you'll see the oil coming off on the rag, and let that dry. Sometimes you'll find that 95% of the time that water-based soap will take off all of those oils. So you don't have to do the mineral spirits the next day, because the soap does such a good job picking up the oils in the cotton balls. But always make sure you clear your soap with distilled water so that you don't have any soap film on there still interacting and chemically with the finish. So that's the easy, you know, do-it-yourself way.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
There are a couple textile questions here. I'll just answer the quick question first to Mel at URI, which is, no, I don't have a secret formula for removing foxing from textiles. You probably have read Tess Fredette's thesis from 25 years ago and the use of chelating agents. And foxing, which is a general term, it might be fly speck, it might be, which is an accretion which will come off, it might be the stains left behind by a mildew bloom. It can be a lot of different things, but I would like to go to my grave knowing that there's an answer to how to get like an oxidized ring stain off of cotton. But no, it's really never satisfying. You can improve the overall health of the object, but generally can't get the staining out. There's also a question from Carolyn Bishop about what to use when water's not strong enough. And the easy thing you can do is to find a very mild surfactant that does not have a lot of things added into it. Like free and clear laundry detergents are fairly mild, but they have a lot of other things in them, so I don't recommend that. So a really easy one is called Orvis, O-R-V-U-S, which is sodium lauryl sulfate. Most of us have heard that sulfates are not good for our hair and our shampoo and things like that, but sodium lauryl sulfate in a very, very, very mild solution, like 0.3%, which if you're talking about using like a jar to make your solution in or a bucket or something like that, think of it like literally in a jar. You kind of dip the tip of your spoon in the jar and get like the tiniest amount and mix it in. It's very hard to make such a low solution. However, you're usually introducing it to a wet object or a water bath, so it will get milder too. The nice thing about Orvis is it has some natural proponents that we look for when we create a cleaning solution. Things like anti-redeposition agent, which once the dirt gets in the water, you want it to stay in the water. Orvis will do that by yourself. And ways of trapping those soils once they come off so they don't they will wash out in the water. So Orvis is a really good, easy thing. Textile conservators have half a dozen to a dozen different surfactant agents that we might go to depending on our object, but Orvis is currently sort of the least problematic, most easy to find, inexpensive, and relatively goof-proof solution. The most important thing to know about anytime you put an additive into your wash bath is how much you're gonna need to rinse it. Once we introduce Orvis into a bath, we are expecting 3 to 4 full rinses, and that's either fill up and dump or spray if you have a soft spray mechanism or whatever you're doing. So remember that. Remember that you're gonna have to rinse and rinse and rinse and rinse. So Orvis would be a good place for you to start. I don't know if you're here. Yes, Darlene is here. Did you, sorry, I'm sorry, that was from Carolyn Bishop. So I can't ask her because I don't believe she's there anymore. Let's see. I think that we may have answered most of our questions. Does anybody else in the 5 minutes we have left want to spring a question on us, or perhaps suggest the type of conservator you might like? Oh, hi, Carolyn. The type of conservator you might like to see in the future participating in this forum.
Camille, there was a question about the photograph and the glass.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did not see that.
I was trying to avoid that question.
Yeah, I was wondering about that one because I'm like, ooh, that one's not a good
It's
one.
a nightmare. I feel your pain. I've tried to deal with that myself. You know, other than going to a photo conservator, it's very difficult. Carefully remove your photo from the glass. I don't know the answer to that, and I've tried doing it myself, and it kind of depends on how stuck it is, and what is it, a color photo or a black and white photo. Color photos stuck are the worst. You know, what is the photo emulsion made out of? But you can try mineral spirits. You can try water on an old, a black and white photo. If anyone's ever developed photos, you know that they were wet at one time, but you really have to kind of wet the whole thing. If you just wet that one spot that's stuck, then you'll get a ring or a sideline. But if it comes down to it's going to be garbage because it's stuck, or maybe I'll try to do something, then try. But otherwise, it's kind of, I don't know the answer. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you're going to throw it out anyway, you might as well try something. And those are my suggestions, either water or mineral spirits, or going to a photo conservator. Those are kind of your options. I can't hear anyone now.
No, I think we're all thinking.
Oh, Camille, you're there. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm here. Anything else? Any other questions? Carolyn, yeah. Can you press the mute button so we can hear you?
Okay. What about these crazy quilts that have silk and velvet and embroideries and there they are. We could vacuum it, obviously, gently, but some of them are threadbare and some are perfect. Any advice on storing and cleaning? And
Totally. You can't wash them.
no, okay, that one off.
Surface cleaning is all that's available. Perhaps if there's a problem in an area, you could spot clean it with a Q-tip. I always try saliva first, and then maybe some good water. Then when the conventional way to deal with losses in these irregular blocks on a crazy quilt, or really most quilts, would be to consolidate the aging fabrics with an overlay of some sheer material. You may have heard the word crepeline. That's a silk sheer, which is very expensive and, in my opinion, not very see-through at all. Also, the edges of the silk are a nightmare to deal with. There are some synthetic shears that you can buy, like a Joann's, that allow for some transparency, but they tend to really read as that color. So for my purposes, I use nylon tulle or net. If you go to a place like Joann's, stay away from the shiny, sparkly end. You want the plain old mat. These are not the highest quality nets that one can get, but they're perfectly fine for your purposes. Start with what we call magic brown. It's really called antique gold. It's just kind of a tobacco stain color. It will work on 90% of the colors that you're interested in consolidating, but there are also burgundies, greens, all these different things. Stick to as few colors as possible, because in some lights, in some directions, when you're looking at a quilt stabilized with a sheer overlay, it will pop. And so the less it pops its color, the better. The nice thing about net is you can cut your shape And you don't have to worry about the edges unraveling. It will never unravel. Although as you attempt this and you get better at it, you might find that cutting afterwards is better, because depending on the depth and the texture of the block that you're overlaying, you could have some shifting in your patch or some pull up, as we call. So you might want to cut it afterwards, which is, again, something that you want to ease your way into, learn how to do it safely. Then all you need to do is stitch down the ditch, as we say in quilting, stitch in the perimeter of your patch, and then perhaps there'll be some characteristics in the center you can also stitch to. Like, I like to stitch where the cracks and the missing parts are, or the border between a hole and a stable area. The less you need to stitch through the healthy silk, the better. But there's another big question, which is, do you stitch all the way to the back or not? And often the back of a crazy quilt is a beautiful piece of silk too. So that's a more complicated question, has to do with the stability of the back as well. But the easiest thing to try is to get a little bit of tulle, practice putting it over the area. If your sewing is making damage, then you want to obviously stop. But there's a big wide margin of error there where you can oftentimes you can get the job done with these little patches, or maybe a larger patch to another area. Occasionally, maybe 50% of the time, we do a full sheer overlay, a full piece of 72-inch wide net over the entire thing. Then we sew through the grid of the blocks or some grid we create. And that way your sheer overlay is there for preventive purposes as well as the piece continues. It's a little better for handling purposes. Also, although you do have to look through the whole thing through this slightly present net, I think it's better sometimes than having sort of a patch here, patch here, patch here, patch here.
Mhm.
So there is a handout on my website about consolidating with sheer overlays or stabilization with sheer overlays. And you'll find it it's probably in the advanced techniques. I recently reorganized my resources and I haven't memorized the categories. I'm really sorry. But that's a good way to learn the technique in a way that's not going to do any damage to your artifact.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely. What do you say? It's 1 o'clock on the dot.
Go.
Yeah, I think that everybody's answers have been given.
Yeah, look in the chat. There's some great comments. Scarlett provided a link to conservation support for Orvis, and NEDCC has leaflets on photo care. So that is great. There's also the CCI notes, Canadian Conservation Institute. I find those notes to be really, really helpful. And the National Park Service also has what are those notes called?
Conservograms.
Conservograms, yes, thank you.
grams.
That are available on their main website. So extremely helpful and there's a lot of them, very thorough.
Yeah, that's a really great series, and you can, download / print out, a really nice comprehensive library for collections care, just using conservograms and CCI notes. And yeah.
Good.
So we have 3 other series planned for the rest of the year. I believe we're going to have a paper conservator, a paintings conservator,
And a photo conservator.
and a photo conservator. Yeah.
Because the photo question came up.
Yes, come back with that photo question. I want to know the answer.
Yeah. Yeah. So please contact Nima with any special requests for the series or feedback for us. And we are super grateful to Heather and Scarlett and the rest of the office for allowing us to try this new series, and for your participation. And you can contact us anytime through Nima, and we're more than happy to field your questions or help you problem solve anything.
Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. Please join us for future events. I'm dropping a link in the chat of our PAG list, and that's how you can also find Camille and Barrett. And thank you so much, Michaela, for joining us, and have a wonderful week. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Scarlett.
You too.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Great to see you
Michaela.
all.
CB.
Sorry about my audio.
It worked.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.